Hi and welcome. I'm Rachel, the Community Manager here at Shorthand, the beautifully simple visual storytelling platform. So what separates the top performing digital publications from the rest? We set out to answer this by analysing over 50,000 shorthand stories to identify the patterns. Our senior data scientist Joe Martin will explain to you the findings, and then we'll hear from Jonny Vickers, the Brand and Visual Content Manager at King's College London, to see how these principles work in practice within their award-winning digital magazine In Touch. Joe, could you take us through the research and what we discovered?
Yeah, of course. So there were three key questions that we wanted to answer with this research. And the first is just how do readers consume digital content? Then we want to know what separates really high performing stories from the rest. And from that, we want to know, are there any patterns that we can identify and that other users can replicate in their own work? So to do this research, we've looked at over 54,000 stories, and they were all published last year. So it's all recent and up to date. And these come from a range of industries and use cases across our user base. So engagement, a bit of a tricky one. Every story has its own purpose or goal. And these can be very complex to extremely simple. But for the sake of kind of consistency and having something that's measurable, we've chosen to look at the two key metrics that we measure on shorthand stories, and that's view duration and scroll depth. The average view duration of a shorthand page view is about 2 minutes. However, most views, around 60%, don't even make it past that 1 minute mark. When it comes to scroll depth, 33% is the average, but the large majority of drop-off comes in the first 5% of the story. This tells us that kind of the further someone reads, the more likely they are to stick around to the end. So what's our advice? Try to get the readers hooked early during that small window of attention that they initially give you. To do this, you need to use clear headlines and opening sections that help set expectations. This gives the reader a strong sense of what your story is about and reduces the chance they'll bounce. Think carefully about the elements you include above the fold and curate your opener to pique interest and encourage readers to keep scrolling. All right, now that we've got a baseline of how users interact with our customers' stories, we wanted to know, how does this change across the different content types that we see? So when we break these stats down by content type, we see that internal comms have the highest average view duration at 160 seconds. That's around 30% higher than the overall average. Editorials and feature stories follow closely behind, while fundraising content performs the worst. For scroll depth, we found that magazines achieve the highest average at 37%. This is likely because magazines can format content as an experience that readers can engage with, rather than just information to consume. Next, as part of this investigation, we wanted to compare a group of stories that we found had really high performance to see what they're doing differently to everyone else. In doing so, we found that top performing stories are really highly indexed in our media-rich section types. That's plus 14% higher use of the background scrollmation section and plus 6% use of the text over media section. What this tells us is that these users are really blending a mixture of rich copy with striking media. And here's an example of one of those rich media sections, our scrollmation section. It's features like this that can really elevate a story when used thoughtfully, but don't just add them in there for the sake of adding them. It's what the story needs that should always come first and foremost.
Thanks, Joe. Really valuable insights there on what the data tells us about engagement patterns. Now let's see how this plays out in practice. I had a conversation with Jonny Vickers from King's College London to discuss their award-winning magazine In Touch and how they approach creating high-performing content. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jonny. Could you tell us a bit about yourself and In Touch magazine?
Sure. As you said, my name is Jonny Vickers and I'm the Brand and Visual Content Manager in the Advancement Comms team at King's College London. And so my job is split across brand management as well as a fair amount of design work. And sort of the main principal piece of design that I work on is In Touch magazine, which is a really, really exciting publication to work on. I've been involved with the magazine in some capacity since I started at King's just over 3 years ago. And when I started out at King's, I was a features writer for the magazine and then started to get a bit more involved in the design, and then I took over the design of the magazine a couple of years ago, when we transitioned to Shorthand.
Something we see a lot is people having great stories to tell, but not knowing how to tell them well. This is evidently something you and your team have gotten right. Could you take us through the design decisions behind some of your stories?
For sure. I really wanted to talk today about our piece about the AKC being the Associateship of King's College. So the Associateship of King's College goes right back to the foundation of King's. It's a 200-year-old university. It will be 200 years old in 1829, in 2029, having been founded all those years ago. And this particular degree, the Associateship of King's College, goes back to those days. And what we wanted to do was to do an article about some of the questions that the AKC has been tackling over the last decade or so. Why I thought it would be an interesting one to talk about today is my approach as a designer is often just to get a really rough idea of what the piece is about, and then to dive straight in. I just like to get straight into some sort of a software and just start building something very maybe abstract and maybe quite concrete from the beginning, but I like to be kind of tactile from the beginning and see something build, usually way off the mark, and then from that I can sort of find some ideas. But with the AKC piece, it was the first piece that I'd worked on at King's, where it was a bit of a blank page and I didn't quite know where to start with it. So I took a bit of a step back and tried to think about what was the reason why I was finding that difficult. And I think there was several reasons for that. But one of them is, as I say, it's a 200-year-old program, and it covers a really wide breadth and depth of conversations. If I just refer to my notes here, just some of the pieces that we were looking at, the modules that they've tackled in the last 10 years include topics like where do you draw the line between free speech and offence? How do we embrace human differences? And I needed a design that could encapsulate that plus several other topics that have been addressed. And because of that breadth and depth, it was tricky to pin that down to a design choice or singular images that could really address that. So I had to rethink my approach to design for that reason. So what I did was, we're really blessed here at King's that we have an archives department. And of course, there's a long history of the AKC, as I mentioned. So I booked into the archives and just asked the fabulous team there to just bring me kind of anything and everything that relates to the AKC. And they brought out some really interesting pieces. And one of the things that sat with me the most was the register of names, all handwritten names in the book of people who have become associates of King's College. Going back, I think the earliest ones in the books I was looking at were from the 1850s or the 1860s. So as I say, over 150 years ago. So I tried to let the weight of that length of time kind of settle in. And I knew that even though we were looking at the last 10 years, that was something that I wanted to play with. So I scanned in some of the blank pages and thought, I'm somehow going to use these in the designs, but I don't know beyond that how I'm going to do it. But I was able to kind of scan those and think a little bit about that. So then when I started to think more about some of those topics that have been addressed and just how much that covers, it became clear quite quickly that what we wanted to do was illustration. So it gave us the opportunity to work with freelancers to kind of bring that to life, which is just the way I love to work. I do love to come up with a concept and then say, I'm not the best person here to make this happen. I just have this kind of idea that I'd like to bring to life. So that's what we did. We worked with Caroline Tomlinson on some really wonderful designs. And they came out and they were really spectacular. And I got to use that paper because we were then able to sort of integrate those images onto the original lined paper. So what you see in the article is 150-year-old paper and with some brand new illustrations kind of bringing to life some of those really special topics. And we were able to use some cool reveal function stuff on Shorthand to kind of make that really live and breathe. So it was a really exciting piece to work on, which Shorthand agreed with. It was featured in the Craft. So yeah, we were really excited about that. And yeah, it was a really standout piece from that particular edition of the magazine. I've always tried to instill a philosophy in design of, even though I'll be the person that's kind of putting the pieces together, that the writers of those pieces are the experts. And very often they will come up with some design ideas, and I don't want anybody to feel like they can't put those ideas forward, because they will have fantastic ideas and their approach will be different to mine, and therefore they can sometimes sort of come together and create something really beautiful. And I think quantum is a really good example of that. Richard Feynman very famously said, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. It's a famously difficult subject to understand. And obviously our sort of mission at InTouch is to make all of these topics accessible to everyone. And quantum mechanics, as I say, is very complex. We have an advancement writing team that we work alongside, who work closely with researchers to kind of find ways to write these articles and find a way to make them accessible to everyone who would be reading InTouch. So I worked with a writer called Kate Hazelhurst on this piece. And first of all, they just did a really wonderful job of taking this big subject and making it accessible. But what Kate's really good at as well is just having these design ideas. And she just puts on Microsoft Word and does track changes and just puts design idea in bold, and we'll list out these ideas, and sort of invariably they're really good. So I got sent through this really wonderful article that even I could understand quantum to some extent. And Kate had put, it would be great if when we get to the quantum bit of the article, we talk about the quantum world, if we somehow went into the quantum world. And I was like, that's a really interesting idea. And I don't know how to do it, but now I've heard the idea, we have to find a way to make that work. So again, I sort of played around with different softwares, and I jumped on a call with Olivia at Shorthand as well, just to kind of chat through some ideas that we would have there. So yeah, I really liked what we did there, which was when we got to a big question mark, and then as we went through, we went into the dot of the question mark to kind of reveal this quantum world, and we found some really nice 1970s footage of quantum being explained 50 years ago, which was a nice retro feel that helped bring that to life. But I think what that speaks to is the importance of collaboration, and I think that is one of the cornerstones of InTouch. Is we want our writers to be able to come up with these ideas so that we can blend what it is they're trying to say with the design itself. So we get something that is cohesive and can speak to a large number of people, because that sort of point around trying to explain difficult concepts in an accessible way is built into the design itself.
So within your stories at the moment, what are you learning about making beautiful content discoverable?
One of the things that we're always thinking about is, when you're thinking about design and accessible design, well, first of all, accessible design is often more discoverable, because when something is accessible to a larger number of users, the algorithms out there will kind of pick up on that, and therefore are likely to rank it higher. And accessibility is something that's really, really important to me. I do sort of live by that philosophy that a design is only good if it's accessible. So that's kind of almost the foundation of what makes a good design. And of course, accessible design is, useful for everyone and necessary for some. So that is where we kind of start. So no matter what kind of an idea I have, if the idea isn't accessible, then it is rejected. So when thinking about the piece we did with DJ Cuppy, who's really, really fantastic, person alum of King's, a DJ, a philanthropist, doing really, really exciting kind of world-changing work. I wanted to find a way to kind of show off their sort of vibrant personality in a way that was accessible. So thinking about things like video content, making sure that we can make that as accessible as possible, thinking about even just the basics of accessible color, making sure all those things kind of match up really matters. And if those things don't work, then we can kind of we get rid of those elements so that it is accessible. I really liked working on that piece because I was also photographer and videographer for that piece, so I got to kind of be there in the room, which was really exciting and great. As I mentioned, Cuppy is involved in all sorts of wonderful work and is therefore extremely busy. So we only had this short period of time to be able to kind of take those photographs. But the longer I've worked as a photographer, the more I'm realizing that the way that I like to shoot is quick. I like to be able to kind of grab things in the moment and keep things kind of lighthearted and fun so that we can kind of keep that energy up. And that just sits really well, I think, with Cuppy's personality. And what we ended up with was a really lovely set of images. And then it's my job to kind of balance off that university guidelines and making sure it carries the prestige and the elegance that would be expected from King's with that sort of editorial side as well. And I think we found a nice blend in that sense. But in terms of going back to speaking about discoverability and accessibility, that's something that we run across all of the magazine. Is just making sure that it's as accessible as possible, running different tools to make sure that we can do that, and amending everything so that that is at the front of our minds, and therefore everyone can access the magazine.
From the work I've seen you create, that you definitely put through a lovely narrative.
We're so blessed with the level of creativity and just the expertise in writing that we have here at King's. And therefore that narrative that you speak about, that you're right, is a really strong element of what we do, is built in right from the beginning. It's really important, I think, in higher education, that we are showcasing what the space is that your particular university is carving out. We want to be really clear that if we're talking about a subject, what our expertise are in that area, because many universities, if not all universities, are doing great work. So what is it that we are doing in that space that is why you should think about King's? And a lot of that comes down to narrative storytelling. Great stories start with people. We love to put our people at the front of what we do. And I think that really helps to carve that out. As I said at the beginning, when I started on In Touch, I was involved as a writer. And I think that's really helped from the design perspective to remember that whatever it is that I'm designing, that we're telling a narrative story. So what is it that we are trying to say? How do we keep that narrative alive? But truthfully, most of that comes from the quality of the writing, which we have here. So yeah, I'm assisted in that sense beautifully by the team.
And with your stories, is there ever like a template or structure that you follow, or is each story completely unique and you approach it with a blank slate?
I think I try to start from a blank slate. I am just really keen on stories that I like the simplicity sometimes, to be able to let the narrative breathe. So from that perspective, I think starting with blank is really nice, because you say, here are the words, and we need to let them tell the story, and everything else is just to assist with that. So if there's something that, and like many designers, I like pretty things. So it's great to have these really cool concepts, and we could do this and we could do that. But often you have to be subtractive about these things and say, well, has that helped with the story or has it hindered it? And that's why we have, obviously got a great team of people involved. Teresa and Ellie in particular, who kind of help to pick those stories and help shape them alongside the writers. Kind of help to kind of have a look at what I've designed and to see whether it's assisting with that storytelling. So yeah, I like to start from scratch. We always like to start from gorgeous photography as well. We've got a lovely roster of photographers. I'm particularly excited about the upcoming issue, because we've worked with Nathan Clark, we've worked with David Tett, photographers who are just wonderful and have done a really great job of putting together some really lovely photography. And for me, because I love to color grade, like that's one of the parts of design that I'm particularly passionate about. And I can often get sent these pictures that are already just so gorgeous, and then I color grade them, and even just that color grading and like the subtlety of light and shade and vibrancy can start to tell its own story, and therefore that will already influence the design. And if you can get that color grading right, and you can let that photography speak, then all the other elements that are there help to feed into that. I think that's really beautiful. So yeah, more often than not, I'm starting from scratch.
One of the features we have are like corner shaping, and we
Yeah.
have a lot of users bring together content that's quite mismatched, and to try and create some synergy, they'll have the shaping be consistent or help frame it around the wording.
Yeah, you want that cohesion across the piece, and especially when in the space that we work in, because obviously a lot of the work we're doing is with alumni, and we're sometimes looking over decades of work. So we want to kind of get that depth of perspective. So they might send us images from speaking at the UN in the 90s, or they might send us images of their time at King's maybe in the 1960s. We may have done a brand new photo shoot with them. So the images in that sense may be quite disparate, and that can, and obviously you can design in a way that makes that part of how you design. But you're right, there needs to be some sort of cohesion. So where there are tools built in that you can kind of help to kind of shape that, I think can be a really useful, very subtle way of bringing a piece together.
Looking ahead, what are your thoughts on the future of design of digital magazines? Where do you think that's heading?
I think what we found that's really interesting in the looking at the analytics of InTouch is that we have this really broad spread of people accessing the magazine from different devices. Sometimes it was really interesting actually, because some articles will have maybe 90+% on a particular device, and that might be where we promoted it, or it might be to do with the kind of content. But what we know is that over the magazine in general, there is a need for us to think very cohesively about design for different aspect ratios, whether that be mobile or desktop. So when I was first sort of working with these kind of a mobile design and a desktop design, in the beginning, it seemed like it was a question about sort of aspect ratio. But then what I realized over time is that it's so much more than that. There's something tactile about it. Like there's a difference between using a mouse, there's a difference between using your fingers to scroll through content, and that will affect the way that you make a design. So some of our articles in particular look quite different across desktop and mobile while still telling the same story. I think that's really interesting. How do you make the sense of a story the same, but with a different sort of design approach? So in terms of the future of digital design, I think that that's only going to become more and more important, like how we think about a desktop design, how we think about mobile design. I was talking with friends of mine who work in the music industry, and the comparison with them is how when you do like you master a track, you always have to think about what it sounds like on a £10,000 pair of speakers, but you also need to listen to it on a cheaper pair of headphones, and then the car test, as it's sometimes called, where you just listen to it in a car. And that's true of design, of course. Wow, doesn't this look spectacular on my desktop? And then you see that you don't have that same responsiveness and that same connection on mobile. So you have to be really mindful of that. So that's something that we think about all the time with InTouch, and I think that's going to be more and more important in the coming years.
That's sort of another level to the conversation that people are having of print versus digital. It's not it's recreating that print feel of like turning the page and taking it in. But now what we should be talking about is the differences between each devices. And that is exactly what you're speaking to, the scrolling versus on a mouse versus on your phone. It's a completely different experience.
It's a completely different experience. And therefore, if you want to have the story land in the same way, then you kind of need to think about those in two different ways. But it's quite exciting to be able to see how you can translate those things. And it's lovely because sometimes you design something with a big screen in mind, and it just looks wonderful on mobile, and sometimes it doesn't. So having that flexibility to be able to design for mobile and desktop is incredibly helpful, and I think is partly why InTouch has performed so well over the last year.
Thanks so much to Jonny for sharing those insights with us, and Joe for the data analysis. Looking at the findings alongside the work that InTouch creates, a few clear patterns emerge. Our research shows that most of the drop-off happens in the first 5% of the story, and King's College London clearly tackle this by creating visual intrigue right from the start, hooking the readers in above the fold with methods like background media autoplaying. We found that top performers have media-rich sections, and InTouch blends things like archival materials with commissioned illustrations and integrates the retro footage that they did in the Quantum story. All of these things create a balance between striking visuals and thoughtful copy that really engage a reader. Another learning from our data analysis is how high-quality content can keep readers engaged regardless of the length, within reason, of course. We see this with InTouch, where they tackle complex topics like quantum mechanics and 200 years of academic history. They're able to maintain engagement by making content accessible through design. Another clear finding is that mobile and desktop need different approaches. InTouch recognize this. It's not just about aspect ratio. It's about the tactile differences between scrolling with your fingers versus a mouse. So they design specifically for each experience. It all comes down to thoughtful storytelling. You need clear visual hooks, striking media, and design that respects how people, specifically your audiences, are consuming content. Thank you so much for watching today. Make sure to take a look at our video library to help you master the craft of visual storytelling.